Ready to go?
Okay, the recording has started.
Right, well, good morning, everybody. My name's Rob Chester, and I'm the CEO of a company called Supply Chain Insights, and I'm delighted to share some stuff from my career, some learnings, some information that hopefully you're going to find really valuable. This is me. I started out at Tesco in my career in the UK, and then I worked internationally for Tesco in Asia and in Europe. I did most of my move from Tesco was to Asda, which was Walmart's UK operation at the time. And I worked for Asda for 7 years. I then moved to China to be Walmart's compliance officer in China, where I met the wonderful Sarah. And I then moved to the United States to manage compliance for the 5,000 United States Walmart stores. So my job for quite a while was as the food safety person for Walmart in the US, but also I used to manage firearms compliance and guns. I then left to run a certification body called NSF International in the UK that provided certification and assurance services to the food industry here, and then set up my own business at SCI. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit anyway. So I'll come back to that in a second. I'm just going to give you some examples at the start of different things that I've done in my career to give you a flavour of where I've been and what I've done. I started with this picture of all the way back in 2008. One of the interesting projects that I worked on was to move away from compliance needing to be done in any way in offices. So for the food safety processes in Asda stores, we moved to everything being done on iPads. Now, that may seem very obvious to you today, because why wouldn't you, is probably what most of you are thinking. But bear in mind, this was all the way back in 2008. So it's quite a long time ago, probably before some of you were around. But we used iPads to basically replace all paperwork so that training videos, policies, processes, everything that could be done on the shop floor was done on the shop floor. And then another example from my time in America was the interesting high five. So one of the things that you will learn as you move on in your careers is making things memorable makes them stick. If they are memorable, people remember them. And if they remember them, you've got a really good chance that they will then implement what people have learned. And if it's interesting, and if they can get it, and if they can understand it, then that's much, much, much simpler. So this was a concept that was developed by a gentleman called Frank Yanis in the United States. Now went to work for the US Department of Agriculture for a while. And this was called High Five. It was meant to boil down the critical food safety things that stores needed to understand into 5 simple things that everybody could understand and everybody could get it, and became a really memorable way that food safety was operated within Walmart. A couple of other examples I'm going to give you. This was Google Gases back in 2016. Back in my NSF days, they had a project called I Succeed, which was all essentially about auditors wearing the Google glasses to do inspections of facilities. And the concept was basically that someone on the other side of the world was able to see in real time what the auditor was looking at. And because they were glasses, that was much easier to do than it was on iPads. It's just an example of a project where automation is coming to replace the traditional approaches that operate in many of the food safety systems today. Other examples are in the range of robotics. Now, this is going at different speeds in different markets and in different countries. But the reality is, as labor gets more expensive in many markets, automation and robotics is developing and developing extremely quickly. There are countries where when the cost of labor is extremely high, this has developed really quickly. In other countries where the cost of labor is not quite as high, it's going much more slowly. But the concept is it's definitely coming, and it's definitely going to make a massive difference when it comes to the food safety industry. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about why we started SCI. So SCI is a business that I started with 5 founders 5 years ago. That was quite brave for me because by that stage I was 50 years of age. I'd only worked in big businesses and I decided to start my own business. And the reason we decided to start it was multiple reasons, but I'm going to give you a couple of examples here. On the right, you see a picture of a pressure gauge. And back in my Walmart days, when I was looking after food safety and compliance for the US stores, I developed something that was called the pressure gauge. And this was looking at altogether 65 factors that showed you that a store was under pressure. They weren't just compliance issues or food safety issues, they were issues in general. But the ideal concept was if you measured all of those 65 concepts, you were understanding what level of pressure the store was at. Was it a heightened level of pressure? Was it pretty much the same as the average? Or was it low pressure? And what we basically realized was the higher the level of pressure in the store, the more likely things were to go wrong. So this was the first element of us actually moving towards proactive interventions on food safety and compliance than just reactive ones. The second reason we created SCI in the first place is that for most certification bodies today, almost all of their revenue comes from auditing. And although I'm a big fan of audits, we very proudly audit in SCI today. What we try and have is a larger toolbox that means we can bring different tools to the table for customers if other tools are better than audits. And that's very difficult if up to 90% of your revenue is coming from audits. My father used to have a phrase that turkeys don't vote for Christmas here. And that's because if ultimately it's going to disadvantage your business to move away from your traditional business model, it's really, really, really hard to do so. So we created SCI because what we wanted to be was a disruptor in the industry. And we're doing pretty well. So we've now grown to a team of 15 people, some featured on the right-hand side there. And we've already been nominated just this year, actually, for 3 awards. We got nominated for an award around our app that we're going to talk to you about in a while that we've been using on rice farms. And we're also growing extremely quickly. We've managed to grow our revenue at 50% through our first 4 years. So that's pretty good. That says that we're doing the right things. Some of the solutions that we've developed, I'm going to come on to talk to you about now that we've been working on at SCI. So the purpose of this slide is basically just to indicate to you, we operate farm to fork. So we have a very large agriculture business that's operating on farms, whether they be beef farms, whether they be turkey farms, etc., etc. We then have a business that operates in manufacturing, in factories, in processors. And finally, we have a business that operates within the head office of different retail customers. So we're truly trying to be a farm to fork operator. As well as that, we also are prevalent in the horticulture and forestry industry. So we work with customers like Grown in Britain, Plant Healthy, the Woodland Trust, because tree planting and horticulture is a key part of sustainability. And on the right-hand side there, you see that when it comes to sustainability at SCI, we believe in a concept called insetting, not offsetting. But the trend in our industry basically is that if you're just going to focus on food safety and nothing else, that's going to be quite hard to do. You have to have multiple services depending on the customers that you're servicing and the customers that you're working with. Another product we've developed is around horizon scanning. Now, most of you will be familiar with what horizon scanning is, but in summary, this is all about trying to spot what's happening around the world that could have food safety implications. So we're looking for recalls in different markets, we're looking for outbreaks of sickness in different markets. But what's different about SCI is that we are already using an AI tool to help us to do that. And we have been using that tool for the last couple of years. The tool is called Feedly. And what we've been doing is having the tool scour the internet for information for us to then put some human intelligence behind that information to try and deduce what that issue in one part of the world is going to mean for customers in another part of the world. But one of the trends that you're going to find as you develop in your careers is that the horizon scanning and particularly artificial intelligence is going to play a bigger and bigger part in how food safety systems operate today. We just believe in adopting artificial intelligence, but always using it with human intelligence that's sat alongside it. So for this tool, we let the horizon scanning do the initial work. So the horizon scanning does the scouring of the internet, does the scouring of publications to understand what the issues are. And then what we do is we have some really good food safety experts that are then looking at what's been found by the AI to see what the issues are, and then try and find a way of putting two and two together, of spotting what that issue is going to be and where it's going to develop. One example of this over the last few weeks would have been an issue on cinnamon. I think I'm going to come on to talk about that in a bit, so I'll come back to that in a second. But quick drink of water. Sustainability often now has to go together with food safety. Sustainability is not optional, despite what the current president of the United States may think. Sustainability and global warming is here to stay, and it's going to be an essential element of any food safety system that you are operating in a sustainable way where you're sourcing products from. So we see that together with the general work that we do and how we operate at SCI. And one aspect I wanted to cover here is the aspect of trying to develop cost-effective solutions. When it comes to sustainability, one of the concepts that most people think is if you're going to go green, it's going to cost more. Most people deduce that. And we have tried not to have that be the case. So when we're working in the sustainability space, one of the things that we're very conscious of is to try and develop solutions which are really cost effective, that are easy to do and do not add a lot of cost into the market and into the problem. Because if you do that, you're going to you'll find it much more difficult for it to get adopted. And if it's difficult to get adopted, then you're likely to be wasting your time. And so the example that we used here is the rice example that I'm going to come on to talk about in a moment, but is the example of where if you're going to do sustainability, it's really, really important to try and make sure that you develop a cost-effective way that you can actually achieve the results that you want to achieve. Animal welfare is also a critical part of what we do at SCI. So we do monitoring of animal welfare. In the UK, where we do most of this work, people really do care about animals. They may know that they're going to be killed at the end of their life, and they like their beef and they like their poultry and they like their pork. but they want to know that the animal has led a good life up until that point and been well treated up until that point. So we do various aspects of animal welfare inspections of farms. Some of them are announced, some of them are unannounced. And we also do some data work for some customers of looking at key output data on animal welfare to see whether or not welfare standards are good on farms or could be improved. An example of this work that we do would be around technical expertise on facilities. So one of the things that we do when we visit facilities is we have welfare experts that are very good at spotting how the animals interact with the humans on the farm. And usually that's a really good sign of whether or not there are animal welfare issues in the facility or whether they aren't. So we do some physical inspections of animal welfare as well as the data work that I talked about before. And forestry. I don't know about you and whether you've ever wondered about whether those trees that have been planted really have been planted and whether they are there. But when you look at sustainability programs today, you see tree planting being a critical element of what you do, but it's much more complex than just planting trees. It comes down to, is it the right species? Is it in the right place? And of course, we all know about deforestation when it comes to food safety as well, because many of the crops that are getting grown today, take soy as one example, can often have really negative effects of deforestation. So even when we're doing programs on farms, we often find the need to be monitoring the forestry aspect of that, as well as going onto the farm to look at the food safety aspect of that concept. Yep, I think I've covered that already. Oh, sorry, went one too quickly. Core values, really important to younger people, I know. So when we work at SCI, we have some core values that we try to instill in people who join us in the first place, of the type of business that we want to be and the type of way we want to interact with each other. Often certification bodies have a concept of called speaking truth to power. Our job is often to tell people messages which they might not want to hear because they're difficult messages. And certification bodies have to do that in a really effective way that still works for the customer, but still gets across bad news when there's challenges and when there's issues to be talked about. So at SCI, we talk a lot about the need for impartiality and confidentiality, and also about integrity and compliance, because it's really important that we are trusted to tell the truth about standards on the ground that we find. Now I'm going to tell you, we're going to go deep now into the story of rice and what we've been doing on rice over the last 18 months or so at SCI. And I'm going to do it because I think it's a really good example of where the world needs to move to a concept of what I call real-time assurance. I'm just going to start with some industry information just to put it into context, and then we're going to go into the detail of what we actually did in relation to the project. And I think you'll find it very interesting and very valuable. So firstly, the food industry is basically a quarter of total greenhouse gas emissions. So if you look at the total emissions from planet Earth, a quarter of them are down to just food. And then when you look within food, 82% of the emissions just come from 15 farm commodities. So 80% of the problem is just within those 15 commodities. And yet, for the 20 largest global food retailers, only 6 have actually set emission reduction targets for its supply chain. So we're behind the game at the moment in terms of what needs to be done. And that leads to the question of why are retailers not spending 82% of their effort on that 82% challenge that I mentioned before? And I put here 3 examples of why they're doing that. The first one is the concept that everybody thinks if you're going to tackle sustainability problems, you're going to impact other things, usually things like yield. So they fear it's going to add cost. Secondly, it's because it's much harder for them to tackle agricultural commodities because they're not usually their primary suppliers. They're not usually the people the retailer has contracted with. And then thirdly, there is a low consumer willingness to pay more. And a concept in the industry that actually, if you're going to tackle this, it's going to increase costs. And so I talk an awful lot about this in different articles. This was one around Science for Sustainable Agriculture, which is basically introducing a concept in the UK called 30-50-50, which is all about growing more food, but having a lower carbon impact. So for those that are interested, that's an article that I wrote recently about the need to have really accurate farm level data around the food system and sustainability. So back in 2024, we got approached by the CEO of an Asian retailer. And this CEO wanted to tackle their number 1 climate commodity, which for this retailer was rice. Now, rice, for those that don't know, is terrible for the climate. It produces both methane and nitrous oxide. And for this retailer, 6% of their total Scope 3 emissions came just from rice. And this CEO rang me and said, look, Rob, you used to talk about this concept of real-time assurance when I knew you. Could you use this real-time assurance concept to help me to monitor whether I can reduce the impact of growing rice? I'll give you some rice farmers to work with, and I want you to see whether or not you can reduce the emissions. Can you develop me a concept, and can you develop me some technology to enable us to do this? And so what we did was we developed an app on a phone for farmers to use. And what we asked them to do was to send images every day to prove that they had implemented the controls that we'd asked them to implement. We managed to embed a little bit of AI into the system. So when the farmers sent the images through, the AI was doing the first check about whether the images were correct or were not correct. But basically what we were able to show really quickly was how the farmers were actually implementing or not the controls on the ground. So we trained them on what they needed to do and then had them take images to prove that they were doing it or not. And this worked incredibly well. So we got a really high level of compliance, but what we were also getting was hundreds and hundreds of images, which basically proved to us that the farmer was doing the right thing every day. Some images here of what we were doing on the fields in Thailand, of training the farmers and showing them what they needed to do and how they needed to do it. And as you can see, we tried to make it fun for the people that were involved and the farmers that were being involved, as well as being really rigorous in the approach that we took. This just basically talks you through how the system actually works. So we started out with a low carbon standard that we wrote for the retailer. So this is where you write down, if you're looking to control things like gas emissions, what controls do you need to put in the standard to actually deliver that? When it came to rice, this was all about controlling water and it was all about controlling fertilizer. We then trained the farmers. So we then trained them what to do and how to do it, and then developed the app that actually the farmer used every day to provide us with the images to prove that they were doing the right thing. When they sent the images in, that's when the data analysis was being done, And the team in Thailand were coaching the farmers real time. So when they sent the images in, we built some basic social media into the app as well. So if the farmer did a good job, they got a reward and a well done and a thank you. And if their images were not quite right, that we were coaching in real time to basically make sure that they were doing the right images every day. We then did do some audits for them to prove that they really were. And we did some in-field methane testing, together with looking at the scientific data, together with doing the emissions calculations. And then we did some field adjustments for the real life of what had happened during the project. So what this really added up to was a really rigorous way that we were proving what needed to be done in the fields. And this had some staggering achievements. So firstly, with the 30 farmers that we worked with, we managed to achieve a 95% compliance rate. Now, as you people go on in your food safety career, you will appreciate very quickly that that's a ridiculously high compliance rate in most compliance programs. Don't get anywhere near that. We managed to grow in the rice by 36%, and that was proven with the 37,000 images that we took. And we did that without impacting yield at all for the rice that we grew. So we basically, the farmers produced the same amount of rice, but did it by reducing the impact on the carbon by 36%, which frankly, we were staggered and really proud of achieving. And everyone was happy. The farmer was happy because they didn't have any yield impact. The government was happy because Thailand grows a huge amount of rice and therefore had a really good methodology that they could use. The retailer was delighted because they got to write this into their CSR report, and finally the consumer was happy because they got the story on pack. So the retailer embedded a QR code on the pack. You could scan that with your phone and get the full story of everything that had been done to grow the low carbon rice. And because it wasn't costing any more, the consumer was happy too. But over and above that, we added some value in addition, because what we were able to do was, as well as take the images, we collected some data from the farmers. And this enabled us, therefore, to make the assumptions around who was the best performing farmers versus who was the worst performing farmers. And we were able to introduce the two sets of farmers together. We were able to do field level traceability because every time the farmer was taking their images, it was GPS located, and they start with a selfie. So they prove where they are the farmer, and they prove where they're doing it from. And what we also achieved was loads of data on yield, on water use, on pesticides, on herbicides, that all enabled really good benchmarking to be taking place. In other words, we weren't just achieving bulletproof compliance, we were adding some value into the process as well. And if there's one criticism that many compliance programs get in the world, it's that they don't add much value. We did here. That turned into a broad methodology. So I've mentioned before the 15 commodities are on the left-hand side that make up 82% of food impact. And what we did here was generate an overall methodology for how we were going to apply what we learned on rice to those other commodities. And we're now underway doing exactly the same process with beef and with lamb, which is at the start identifying the changes you need to make, then training the farmers, then using the technology to do the real-time assurance, all the way around to then measuring and reporting again, and then going again in year 2. Because if you're looking to reduce the impact of those commodities, it's not a one-off exercise, you have to do it multiple times. And this is an example of what we then did for beef. So for beef, we start by doing the initial research of what are the different options, what are the different levers you can pull if you want to reduce the impact of raising beef. And we give this into the retailers in a very simple decision tree like this, so they can understand if you want to do something with methane inhibitors, you can. The emissions impact of doing that is likely to be high. The proof of science on all of that is now high. It's all proven science. The speed of impact is going to be medium. So if you make that change, you're going to see results pretty quickly. The cost is also medium because the methane inhibitor is not free, you have to buy them. And the difficulty is still medium because it's not that simple for the farmer to do. But what we're giving the retailer here is a really clear set of choices to enable them to work further at reducing their carbon impact. And as I did my scorecard at the end of this is the sort of rules that I work to. Is it an optimal people and structure? Sustainability is here to stay, so I scored that as yes. It's digital, it's not analog. Yes, we use the app. We're aspiring to predict. Well, yes, we can start to do that now because of the data that we've collected. It's a global project with global implications, but it was done very locally. We've got more and more transparency because obviously producing a QR code on the product at the end gives consumers information they've not had before. Consumers are the new regulators, in my view. Regulation in most countries is getting fewer and fewer. Certainly it is in the UK. I'm sure that will be in some of your countries too. And it's an agile product rather than being static, which the farmers loved and which embraced AI. So overall, I was really happy with this project and the results that it achieved. Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope that's been really useful. I've left my contact details on the screen there, so by all means scan the QR code and get in touch. And if you'd like to know anything more about what we do at SCI, I look forward to hearing from you.